Thank you all very much for coming. I'm just going to introduce myself and then ask the committee to just go around and introduce themselves first of all. So I'm Lucy Powell. I am the chair of the committee. And Alex?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Alex Burrows-Curtis, Member of Parliament for Cardiff West.
And I'm Paulette Hamilton, you're right, Member of Parliament for Birmingham Erdington.
I'm Sarah Coombs, I'm the Labour MP for West Bromwich, and I'm Lucy's PPS.
Joy Morrissey, the MP for Beaconsfield.
Chris Chape from Christchurch.
Chris Vince, MP for Harlow.
Marie Goldwyn, Liberal Democrat MP for Chelmsford. Wendy Chamberlain, MP for North East Fife, and I'm also the Lib Dem Chief Whip.
Great, and I think we've let you know in advance that I was going to ask each of you to make some opening remarks, if you're happy to do that, about your experiences and what you think this committee needs to hear and know about our inquiry into accessibility. So, Esther, shall I start with you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. I suppose I was going to open just by saying that for me, my sort of encounter with the accessibility in Parliament has been it's been twofold, because on the one level it's been personal as a disabled member of the parliamentary community. I should say I'm a journalist. I work in the press gallery for Politico. So there is that level on which I engage with Parliament and the environment here every day, trying to navigate it, trying to make it work for me. And then at another level, I also cover Parliament as part of my job, and a lot of the reporting I've done today has been on Parliament as a workplace, in many senses, so both kind of issues of bullying and harassment in Parliament, but also the physical environment. And I think through both of those experiences, I've heard stories, as many of you will have done, about ways in which Parliament doesn't work for various members of the community or makes their jobs hard. And I think both from my own experience and from talking to others, that is the main issue that sort of needs some greater thought. It's when Parliament and the conditions here are actually making it harder for people to do their jobs, even though we are obviously at the centre of all of the kind of greatest institutions in the UK. And I think that is the kind of tension that probably we're going to speak more about today.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And yeah, I think we'll be looking at some of the physical aspects as well as some of the procedural and information and ways of working as well, hopefully. Sunara.
Hi, I'm Sunara. I'm a member staff. I'm a neurodivergent. I like to use that term as opposed to Asperger's. I feel with the term Asperger's there's a lot of stigma. With neurodivergency, I think there's been a bit more attention to it, but I don't think people fully grasp what it means and how people like myself feel and how we work in office environments. I have to be honest, I've masked my neurodivergency for a very long time. It's only in the last, I'd say, couple of years that I felt the need to be a bit more authentic and true to myself, probably because I'm a mum now, and I think it's very important. You sort of lead by example, don't you? But because I have to go into the fact that because I have been masking, that has been quite difficult for my employers to know exactly what I'm going through. But I feel there isn't enough discussions around employers and staff, and I don't think employers know enough. And I think there's a learning process And I think having this sort of committee will sort of create a platform for us as neurodivergents to speak to people and teach you as well what it means. And although there have been, in my experience, some adjustments, it's quite limited, because I don't think people understand the need for more adjustments to be made. For example, lighting is an issue. It's not that I've got an eyesight problem. My eyesight, thankfully, is really good, but we get overstimulated very, very quickly. When there's a lot of people, a lot of noise, we get overstimulated. It's a bit like having a can of, something with high energy. Mm-hmm. And we just get very, very hyped. And these are some of the challenges that someone like myself has to face every day. Although I work from home once a week, I'm in the office, although I work very... so it's quite condensed hours, but even that period of time, I am very stimulated. By end of the week, I am so burnt out. And people don't understand that burning out is actually a physical thing. So as soon as I go home on a Friday, there's no movie nights with my little girls. I'm literally passed out on the sofa, literally every Friday, because of the whole week's overstimulation. I can't enjoy the evening anymore. That's how it is every single week. And it's actually a physical thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone understands just how difficult it is to be overstimulated and burnt out.
That's really helpful, thank you. We'll look forward to hearing more about that shortly. Harry.
Hi, I just want to say before we end, I'm really grateful to the committee for the chance to speak, but also for the prioritisation of this as an issue. I know this came out of a lot of members' staff and a lot of house staff survey, but it's quite vindicating to know that there's a lot of in the parliamentary community that care about this issue, first and foremost. So I'm really, really glad that you're hearing from us. I have worked for 4.5 years on the parliamentary side, directly on the parliamentary side, for a senior Labour MP select committee chair, and I will, for obvious reasons, speak mainly to those kind of physical barriers that I've experienced as a staff member on the estate, which have been numerous. I'll sort of get into them, but I guess the main thing that I'm here to try and convey to you is just that I think that disabled staff have a lot of potential and value add to the whole political discourse. I mean, this place is literally where I dreamed of working, and you know, I think there's a real difference between what you assume would be the reality in a place like this, where you assume that the access standards will be taken seriously, and that it would be the place where you feel like you can do your job kind of free of impediments, and the reality that I've faced. But I know that there are endless people behind us all here today that also want to be in this position, and I hope that their experience will be easier than what certainly mine has been. But I would say it's a real privilege to work in this place. And I'm just very passionate about trying to make sure that it's as accessible as it can be for the next generation of people in my kind of position who might aspire also to be where I am today. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Harry, and that's all our aspiration, and that's why we're really pleased to be doing this inquiry. So thank you for coming along and being part of it. And I think you make a really good point there, that we make the laws for other businesses and other workplaces to follow, and perhaps we're not living up to those totally ourselves here. Mike, thank you for coming, Mike.
That's all right. And, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Everett. I'm a House of Commons clerk, so I'm an employee of the House of Commons. My role is basically to provide impartial procedural advice to members of Parliament. And so I work currently as clerk of the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee, but I've worked for the House since 2012 and done a variety of different roles in some procedural offices like the Public Bill Office and on a variety of select committees. I suffered an accident in 2017, so I'm also a wheelchair user, unable to stand or walk independently at all. So I have to use a wheelchair to get around at all times. So I've experienced working for the House as both someone without a disability and for the last sort of 8 years with a disability. And I suppose I should also just say for the benefit of the committee that although I'm an employee of the House, I'm speaking today in a personal capacity. I'm not representing the House of Commons, not speaking on behalf of the House administration in any way. I would like to just start by saying that as an employee of the House of Commons, I've always found the House as an employer to be personally very supportive of me as a member of staff with a disability. I've always had very understanding and supportive colleagues and line managers, and all of the members that I've worked with have always been really supportive and very understanding. If we're talking about physical accessibility, though, I do think that the current parliamentary estate does pose quite significant challenges for wheelchair users like myself. Those do act as barriers, not just for staff, but also for members with disabilities and visitors who come onto the parliamentary estate. I'm sure you're all aware that the palace itself is not a particularly wheelchair-friendly building, but that is a 19th century building, so that is kind of understandable. I think what I would emphasise to the committee is, as a wheelchair user, I find many of the more modern buildings which make up the parliamentary estate much more challenging to navigate in a wheelchair, and I think that's more difficult to understand. So the building we're in today, PCH, Portcullis House, there's lots of things about it I find difficult to navigate, like lifts that break down quite frequently and take a long time to work. You've only got one lift that gives you direct access to the palace, so if that's out of order, to my mind, that you have to sort of leave the building to get across to the palace. If that was a member with a disability, that potentially takes them outside of the secure perimeter, so that's potentially an issue. You've got very heavy doors on most of the rooms in Portcullis House, including the publicly accessible committee rooms. Even some of the accessible features we have, like automatic doors, they don't always work. I tried one this morning and it didn't work, for instance. So I do think there's lots of issues with the current parliamentary estate. Individually, you might say each of those is maybe understandable, like lifts do break down. But when I think you look at them collectively, it does build up a sort of collective picture, and it does suggest that we have got an issue with accessibility on the estate, and it's something that I think perhaps Parliament should be aiming to do better on. So I'm really pleased that the committee is looking at this area.
Great, well thank you very much. And yeah, we are, once we've got various panels, we've heard from current and former MPs, we've got yourselves today as representatives of different staff who work here. We're also hearing from some colleagues from the Lords, where in some cases they've made better adaptations, and then we will be bringing in the senior House sort of authorities to kind of relay some of those concerns. And just before I move to Wendy, I think we're just going to talk about some of the physical things first and then maybe move on to the procedural. Just to say that Wendy and Joy, there are tributes to a former member of staff in the chamber at 12:30, so they're both going to be attending that. They're not being rude, it's just one of those that only just come up this morning. Wendy.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. I usually reflect when I'm having conversations with constituents about the fact I do 12 to 14,000 steps here a day, because I'm back and forward across the state. And for my physical health, that's a good thing, but I think that really does demonstrate how much we have to use the building and how we're moving across it. So to hear about those accessibility issues is really important. Just a general question, obviously you're all working, Sunara and Harry, you're working for MPs. Esther, you're obviously working for an external organisation like for the House. Do you feel that you've been able to talk to your employers about the accessibility requirements you have, and have they been supportive in that respect? And if I can start with yourself, Esther.
Yes, I mean, I was going to say that obviously I work for an external organisation, so as is usual with any employer, it was part of the process of being hired was they sort of asked about my access needs. I think potentially what it could be a bit of a gap at the moment is any sort of conversation between the House authorities and external organisations that are employing people here. Because some disabled members have benefited from the support of the House services to kind of induct them and see where their needs might be.
That's not something you've experienced?
No, not that I can recall. And to be frank, some of the biggest challenges for me using the press gallery.
Well, I was going to say the press gallery in itself suggests that it's trickier to get to.
On a daily basis aren't things that my employer would be able to address. So that's what the case has been for me personally.
It's potentially about how do we strengthen that sort of house relationship with external organisations that do have people here. I mean, that's true for parties, I suppose, as well. And Sunara, do you work generally in your MP's home constituency office, or are you coming into Parliament? And what's the accessibility like there?
I work in the constituency office. It's quite a small environment that we work. There's quite a large group of us who work in one room. In my case, there have been some adjustments made. I did not disclose my neurodivergency when I first started working here, because at that time it worked for me because it was remote working, so no one needed to know how I felt or what my needs or what adjustments I needed. However, when it came to move into the constituency office, that's when I thought I have to disclose it because it wasn't going to work for me. So in my case, I was grateful for some adjustments. I received coaching, and I have a set desk that I work from, and I work from home 1 day a week. However, further requests were not granted due to needs of the constituency, needs of the MP and so forth. I have been given a headphone, but I'm sure everyone knows having a headphone on all day does not work, especially when you're working with a group of people. You have conversations naturally. It's just not practical. So although I would benefit from noise cancellation headphones, having that on from 9:30 until I leave, it just does not work. It's physically very difficult to cope with. So some adjustments, but not all. And remote working, we were grateful. That's not the correct term to use for the pandemic, but it helped people like me. And it was the first time in my entire life I felt, oh my God, I can stop working part-time now. I can actually work full-time, and it actually worked. I was able to work because we are creatures of routine. We love routine. I can work non-stop if I wanted to, and it worked. But the constituency office has now sort of set me back, and I have had to reduce my hours, which is a shame because I genuinely love my job.
Yeah, there's that balance of reasonable. What's reasonable in terms of adjustments,
absolutely.
in terms of getting the work done, it can be challenging.
Yes.
Harry, you and I were on the admin committee group in the last.
We were, way back when.
Yes, way back. What's it been like for you in terms of the adjustments that you've needed here in Portcullis House and elsewhere to do your role?
I think it's a really perceptive question, and maybe the most important area to start with the focus of how the employer has been, because it brings me to my central point, which is that I think that Parliament as a whole is a patchwork, because obviously, just to speak about the House of Commons, it's 650 different MPs, and I'm very, very fortunate that I have worked for the same member for 4.5 years, and there's a reason I haven't moved members. It's because I've felt supported by my member and backed to do what I know I can do in that role. But I think that it is a real patchwork of provision. Obviously, employers, if you take any given subsection of 650 employers in the country, there were going to be good ones and bad ones. There were going to be variable ones. So I think the main point I would make here today as a member of staff is that actually there's a lack of systemic access to policy support, and it's left very much to be on whether you're, certainly as speaking as a member of staff only, whether you have a good member or bad member, or not bad member, but they're a good member.
We need a consistent.
Yes, and I think basically, we need to be we need to be also realistic about the fact that MPs are not. They don't usually follow the sort of conventional career path of progressing through management. Like, not a lot of not all MPs are experienced people managers, and you're suddenly put in this position where you're actually responsible individually for the welfare of, potentially up to 8 people. And you are making recruitment decisions in that environment when the life of a parliamentarian is extremely busy. And extremely, you can't necessarily afford to think massively about whether every possible need of your staff is being considered, and it should be, obviously.
And in terms of this space, obviously working in a space that you, in the same way as Esther described, that the individual MP isn't responsible for.
Well, yes, exactly. Which, from my point of view, just to quickly give you a précis of my experience in the House of Commons. So I came in on the Speaker's parliamentary internship scheme in 2020, set up by the previous Speaker, John Bercow. And it was it was a scheme explicitly designed to get people from underrepresented backgrounds into Parliament, working for member staff. It's a 9-month internship scheme. And on that, I vividly remember it because I remember applying for it, because it made me feel very encouraged. It said disabled people are in particular underrepresented and encouraged to apply. So I thought at that stage, okay, great. I kind of didn't give it 2 thoughts. I thought if that's written down, then it must mean that they've done some thought at the back end, right? And then I went through this highly competitive recruitment process. It was, as I said in my intro, it was literally my dream job to work for an MP. Was delighted to get the job. Was so excited to move down to London. And then once I got the job, it was very plainly clear that kind of no pre-thought on the part of the Commons itself, because at that point it's very clear to state I was an employee of the House of Commons, not my member, because I was an intern in a registered scheme. And there was no real forethought on part of the House as to what it would mean to have a wheelchair user work on the parliamentary estate. And just to give you an example of that, it took my office manager to suggest a walkabout before I started. So I came up to London a month before I started to kind of walk through the route between Portcullis House and my office, which was then in Norman Shaw South. It took my manager to propose that, to actually point out that there were 4 sets of doors, including a disabled toilet, that were not automated, there was no way I could get through them independently because they were all push doors. I can get through pull doors because I could just grab through them, but can't get through pull doors. And if it hadn't been, to get back to the heart of your question, Wendy, if it hadn't been for the fact that my office manager at the time was thinking ahead and proactive, nothing about the House, despite them having a dedicated, diverse and inclusion team, would have captured that need. And the net effect of that the net result of that visit was that those 4 sets of doors, including a disabled toilet, which I emphasise because I just think it's an essential need, they were asked to be automated, but it took 13 months since after I'd started in the job for all of those 4 doors to be completed. And it's I need to be very clear at this point that I don't blame any individual for that failure. Like, everybody was kind of collectively horrified by the situation. But the reality is the House of Commons bureaucracy took 13 months to provide me with the ability to go to the toilet unaided or to get in and out of my office unaided. You will know as members, you sometimes have staff that stay later than others, people work different work patterns, sometimes there are needs to stay late. And I was in a position 13 months in where I physically could not be the last person out of my office or the first person in the morning because I couldn't get into my office without the door being automated. Yeah. And I have some experience before this in local government and also public sector, and that when I got the job for that was the requisite doors of the toilet in my office were automated in a week. And it took 13 months here. And as I say, Chair, and I really want to emphasise this, it's not the fault of anybody individually.
To be honest, given some of the other things we've heard, 13 months is quite quick. If I can be honest with you, but you know, absolutely.
It's back to that systemic aspect, because there's a scheme, a very positive scheme in terms of attracting people from different backgrounds and ethnicities, disabilities, etc. into Parliament, but not necessarily thinking of the consequences of who they might recruit into that scheme.
Yeah, and if I can just quickly pick up on this, because I'm aware I've taken quite a lot of time, but if I can just quickly pick up on that point, I think it's really important to recognise that I think the intention of the House is good, but there's just no thought about the reality. And the fact that it took 13 months, my initial internship was 9 months long. So if I hadn't, luckily my member in this circumstance had the financial capacity to take me on as a full-time member of staff and thought it was worthy of doing so. But if that hadn't been the case, my dream job, which was a 9-month internship in Parliament, wouldn't have the doors wouldn't have even got off the ground. So I would have spent that entire internship being followed around by a colleague, which is literally what had to be done every time I wanted to go to lunch or go to the toilet. And I would end by saying, I don't think that there would be that level of passive acceptability for any other group in society. I think if you were to say to any other group in society, you cannot independently exit or enter your office or go to the toilet, I think there would be collective outrage. I think the outrage would be all over social media, it would be everywhere. And yet, what I had to experience, and what countless other people I'm sure had to experience, and countless people that don't even apply to work in Parliament will experience, is that actually everybody is morally opposed to it, but there's a kind of passive acceptance of access barriers because it's just that's how things are. And that's particularly acute here, to go back to the point that Mike made very powerfully. Look, the Parliament itself, the palace is very old, we accept that, we accept there's access barriers. I'm not unrealistic at all, I'm not an impractical person. But for Buckler's House was opened
it's unforgivable,
this
really.
Century.
Yeah.
And my office was in Norman Shaw South, an equally kind of not historic, it might be listed, but not historic building. It shouldn't, there is no concrete excuse for why that should happen. And yeah, I'll end there.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to come and add anything to that on that adjustment?
One other thing I wanted to add in was just the piece around security that you mentioned. How much of a barrier are the security measures on the estate? That was the only other question I wanted to ask Mike.
I mean, we need security, so do accept there has to be that trade-off. But I mean, a good example of that is that, I mean, the main entrance to Portcullis House for wheelchair users is the accessible entrance facing the Thames. That can only be opened for me to get in and out when armed security is present. I understand that. That's why we have it there. But I often have to come on site quite early for a select committee meeting or leave quite late, and that entrance is only, I think, open from 8 till 8. So when I come in early for select committee meetings, like I had a committee meeting this morning, I have to come in through an entrance via the palace, so someone with kind of the greatest accessibility need is being made to kind of go much further than everyone else. And there's a pass holder entrance immediately next to the accessible entrance, which I think pass holders can get into, before 8 o'clock quite easily because they don't need armed security present there. So there's not quite, to my mind, a parity of access to the estate there for wheelchair users and people with disability. It's not security's fault. I understand why that's there, but I think that's it's quite an interesting point.
I'm even thinking of just stuff like getting up to the pass reader. And just even negotiations, Harry, when you came in, of getting your chair into the right place, sort of just that accessibility around the estate certainly made me think of that. Thank you, and thank
great.
you.
Yeah, no, that was
all.
great. Did you want a quick follow-up?
Just a really quick follow.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you for sharing. This is really important and really powerful, actually. Sunara, can I ask you, it's quite a personal question, so if you don't want to answer it, then obviously please don't. But I'd like to understand a bit more, because you said earlier on that you mask a lot, and I wondered if you'd be willing to share with us an example of where you've masked, so that we could understand, actually, if you weren't masking, how would you experience it? Just so that we can understand a bit more. But if you don't want to answer that, then I completely understand.
No, I'm here to sort of talk about it. So masking, it can be very different. I can be quite blunt and be very honest. So if you say to me, say you wore a colour and you came up to me and said, oh, does that suit me? I'd probably say, no, it doesn't suit you. Right, but I've been able to mask and say, no, you look really pleasant. So there have been certain.
You could be a politician.
So this is just one of the just few of the things. Other one would be, for example, again, lighting. I could say, yeah, the lighting is absolutely fine, but I know that by end of the day, my blood pressure will be going up. It's a physical issue. My blood pressure will be going up, and my eyes will be burning, and I will not be able to do much for the rest of the evening. And these are just some of the things I have been masking. Just being very, very careful in how I talk to people. That's not me being unauthentic. It's just also me reflecting as well that sometimes honesty is not always perceived well, but just be mindful as well how I talk to people. And working from home, it helps. When you talk to your colleagues on Teams, for example, I don't do small talks. I don't like small talks, and that's an area I do struggle with, and I do have to. When someone asks, oh, have you watched this movie? And I'm like, I don't want to talk about this. But I actually do watch certain TV series, some movies, even though I don't want to, just so that I can actually have conversations. My background is politics and religion, and sadly, that is the areas I know very well. And if I could, I'd talk about those two areas all the time. But I know that's not how the world works. So yeah, to fit in, I'd talk about different things, and I'd learn about things, I'd read about things that people would like to talk about. I'd watch soaps at times. I hate it, but I do watch it just so that I can converse with people without them thinking, oh gosh, she's so weird.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thanks. That's really helpful. Right, it's great. We're getting loads of really good evidence and experiences from you. I think we've got a few other questions on the physical aspect of the estate, and then we'll try and get on to some of the procedural sort of ways of working things as well. So maybe just choose where to come in, where you want to have something on to offer.
Yeah, no, thank you all of you for coming in. I think it was really interesting. I think what strikes me is something that Harry said about, actually, if we don't get this right, there's a whole group of really talented people that are going to be put off working here, and I think we're lesser for that, aren't we? And some of you have answered my question already, but just if they've got any more examples, really, of just how a lack of reasonable adjustments or the physical estate have made your job more challenging. The example Harry gave about, you couldn't be the first person at work, or you couldn't be the last person at work, so you had a massive impact on your shift pattern, was really interesting. But I just wonder if there's any other examples of that at all that any of you might have. Yeah.
I've got an example of the physical estate being a challenge for me as a clerk compared to, I suppose, non-disabled clerks, and that's actually working in the Commons chamber itself, which is quite an inaccessible space for a wheelchair user like myself. So when I say working in the chamber, I mean as a clerk at the table in front of the speaker. the table of the House, like the gap between the table of the House and the front bench on either side is really narrow and difficult to get a wheelchair down, especially when the front benches are busy. But also the table of the House itself is on a sort of raised dais, about sort of a foot high. I have done it in the past. I have periods where I've been able to do it, but I do find it really physically challenging to do, and actually, quite, if I'm being honest, quite intimidating. So I've kind of not done it in recent years as a result of that. I have to sort of transfer basically from my wheelchair onto one of the seats at the table. So that's about a foot and a half. And when I say transfer, I mean I have to, because I can't put any weight through my legs, I have to use my upper body strength and my arms to basically lift myself and drag myself from my wheelchair onto a chair on the dais. Obviously quite worried about falling and sort of interrupting proceedings and things like that. Then my wheelchair gets sort of taken away and put at the back of the chamber, and so I'm kind of immobile when I'm at the table itself and not able to undertake the full range of responsibilities that clerks would do. So I couldn't administer a division, for instance, because you have to get up to go and get the slips and the tellers, and then have to do the whole thing in reverse to get out of there. So I find that quite physically challenging, and I'm always quite conscious that I could fall or slip or something like that, and disrupt proceedings in the chamber. But I think that's a good example of the physical estate, because it's something that as a clerk I want to be doing. You want to be clerking in the chamber, but it is more difficult, more challenging for me to do as a wheelchair user.
Do you think that would sort of limiting your career, kind of, in advancing your career as in the clerking side of things? I mean, that's a really good example.
It's definitely a barrier, I think. I mean, we've got lots of very talented people who work in Parliament, and if you're a clerk, everyone tends to get very similar experiences. We tend to get kind of circulated round and work in procedural offices and also on select committees and things like that. So everyone's got very similar experiences, and obviously one of the experiences you do want is working in the chamber. That's kind of what you kind of aim for as a clerk. Yeah. So I have been able to do it. I should make that clear. But for me, I found it quite difficult, so I've not done it as much as
very unpleasant.
I would echo that from the lobby. Again, it's just one aspect of the job of physically getting into the press gallery, which is high above the chamber, is very precarious and frankly sometimes a bit risky. And again, I can do it, but it's sort of a managed risk, and therefore I do tend to minimise the occasions on which I go there, which is a shame, because you're not getting the full experience and the full sort of force of the Commons debates.
Yeah, and it's a key part of the access that you have as a lobby pass holder is to be able to actually soak in the atmosphere, spot things that you can't see on the screen, other things that are going on maybe at the occasion. So do you find that maybe limits your career opportunities or the way in which you can cover things, or you're just conscious of it yourself?
I wouldn't say it limits career opportunities. I think it's more it can limit my reporting a bit from what it could be, and I think that is a shame.
Yeah. Alex, you wanted to just follow up on that?
Thank you, Chair. And just drawing on those couple of examples you've talked about, it strikes me that actually rather than obviously fostering an inclusive environment, it's actually exposing yourselves, because it's drawing attention. So, the example you've used of physically having to sort of lift yourself into a chair, or that you've used, Esther, I guess, in a public sense, is actually drawing attention to, the difficulties and challenges you're having as a result of these access limitations, and that runs counter to everything that obviously Parliament and what we're meant to be here doing, which is rather than be inclusive, it's actually I don't want to put words in the mouth, I'm just curious what you would say, but exposing you and sort of making you prominent in that moment, which has the complete opposite intention of what we should be here to do.
Can I just come in on that? I think it's a really important point. Just to start by saying that Parliament for anybody, able-bodied, disabled, is a very intimidating environment to enter. I'm sure even MPs feel it, right? Like when you first come in, it's you. And as a disabled member of staff, certainly you are very aware of your difference in this environment, and you're also very aware of trying to, at least when you first start, I've got the benefit now of 4.5 years experience. I've got a supportive member, so a lot of this has changed since then, but at least when you first start, I was very aware of the perception that the bar that I had to reach to be deemed as capable was slightly higher, not because of anybody being actively discriminatory, but just because of the fact that I stand out in this environment, and the fact that there is a need to prove you can do this job. And I think in that context there's a bit of a contradictory dynamic between the fact that actually asking for the support you need to be able to do that job is a hard thing to do, and this is where I'd put it back on the health authorities to be more proactive. Because you feel like every time you make the disability the focus of what you're doing, you're slightly playing into the fact that they've employed you and you're different and you shouldn't be this way, but it makes you feel less capable because you're asking for support. And so what I would say is, as an example of the reasonable adjustment question that you very kindly asked, it's very hard to navigate, and it does depend a lot on the member, certainly as a member of staff. It does depend a lot on the member being backing you and the member's office backing you. When I described my doors experience previously, but I waited about 18 months to ask for a water cooler because I couldn't independently get to the kitchen to fill up my water bottle, and I just wanted to be able to get water for myself because it's something I can do if I've got access to an accessible cooler. And the reasonable adjustments framework bounced into place straight away, and they were like, yeah, we can give you this. They could give me the cooler, but not the ongoing supply of water. So then I was then told that it would bounce onto my members' expenses to be claiming for the water. I mean,
and it's true. Yeah.
Rather than, if you're going to give me a cooler, surely surely the water's got to be part of that as well. And we live, as you will know, Chair, as everybody here will know, we live in an age where MPs' expenses are rightly scrutinised to the nth degree. And I was in a position where I didn't want it to be a headline that my MP had claimed for whatever it would be, 1,500 quid of water, because the truth wouldn't cut through then. It would just go down as a mark on their record. And the reality of that was that it was just to provide water for me. Yeah. Now, look, in the end, we won that battle, but the reasonable adjustment framework, just to come directly onto your question, reasonable adjustment framework could be a lot more, one, proactive, and two, a lot more common sense.
Yeah. That's really helpful, and what you described kind of echoes very strongly what we heard from the members and former members as well about not wanting to make themselves feel different and asking for different requirements, that these should be things that should be kind of brought for them. Yeah, Mike, and then I'm going to bring Sarah in.
Just one thing I did want to sort of mention to the committee that I wasn't really aware of before I was disabled, when we're talking about kind of physical access, is it also has quite a big, I think, mental load for disabled people. And what I mean by that is there's kind of, as Harry's kind of articulated, you have to think about so many more things when you're disabled than a non-disabled person does every single day. So, I mean, when I commute into work, there are multiple points at which my journey could be disrupted and stopped as a result of accessibility. Then when I get onto the estate, I might not even be able to get into the building if the accessible entrance is out of order. Once you're on the estate, if you've got meetings in a different part of the estate, you've got to think, how am I going to get to that meeting? I need to get that lift. There's no step-free access, so I need to get that lift, but that lift doesn't take me all the way to where I need to get to. I need to change and get a lift further down. What am I going to do if the lift is out of order? That sort of thing. So you need to leave a lot earlier and factor in more time to travel around the estate. People with disabilities have all of those sorts of things in their head and have to think about that all at the same time as also doing the day job well. And that was something that I really wasn't aware of until I became disabled. And I think the physical estate is probably the biggest contributor to that mental load. So anything that can be done to improve physical access not only helps in a physical sense of kind of getting around, but it also, I think, helps to alleviate some of that worry and that sort of mental load that I think people deal with.
That's really important. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate your honesty and insight about this, which came up very strongly in the member submissions, but it's clearly just an issue across the board. And I think, you're all saying that, individual people have goodwill, but the best will in the world is basically pointless if it takes 13 months to get doors that are workable. Yeah. And so my question is, and you sort of raised it a bit, do you feel like there is really a proactive drive from house authorities, or is it always just you constantly having to raise stuff and then reacting very slowly? And then also, if you need something changed, do you know where to go? Like, is there a single point, or are you having to raise it with like 5 different sets of people and go through huge hoops and processes in order to just get the basic things that you need to be able to do your job and also make the state accessible for others?
I was not aware of a point of contact I could raise these things with, and the thing that would affect me actually probably most routinely is lifts being out of order and not being able to get into the office. And generally I find out about that from the press gallery WhatsApp group, because people will say there isn't anyone who sort of is informing people who aren't able to access their office in that eventuality. So I think the answer to that is definitely there are big gaps, and I think partly that has arisen because of the patchwork that Harry mentioned, and because just something I wanted to mention was I don't want to act as if kind of we're the first generation of disabled people to work in Parliament. There have been disabled staff before, there have been many disabled members before. But I think most of those people coming in have had to kind of reinvent the wheel every time and kind of set up their own workarounds, rather than there being a sort of established system or process of the kind that I think you're alluding to.
And I think part of that is because we sort of put it on the house authorities, but it's also part of the kind of employment structure, and the fact that people are seen as not being employed, therefore it's not theirs, or they're employed by a member or an outside organisation or whatever, and so it's about that service being blind to that. It needs to be blind to that, in the sense that it's a service for everybody who's on the estate, regardless of who their employer is, in that sense. Did you want to come in? And then I've got Chris.
I do. I've written this down, so if I don't look at anyone, forgive me. I've written it so that I can say it properly. Adjustments are often offered with strict limits, with no clear justification. This lack of clarity is especially difficult for someone like me with neurodivergency, for whom clarity is essential to functioning well. We require clarity. Sometimes it's a bit like speaking to a child, maybe, but we need thorough explanation at times why a certain process is how it is. Too often support feels performative, not enough to tick a box, but not enough to remove real barriers. The absence of transparency creates uncertainty, which really affects us mentally. Many of us disclose our neurodivergence selectively, knowing advocating for support can come at a cost. And I speak from experience, not for here, but before, where I have not been able to secure a job when I have disclosed, and they probably assumed she can't do this job. It was just an assumed factor without really knowing what I can offer to the employer. We shouldn't have to prove and reprove our needs, and this is something which is continuing and is an issue all the time that I face. Instead, we need a culture built on trust, flexibility, and genuine responsiveness. And it goes back to what you said, is in terms of proactiveness. this environment does need to be proactive. I find it's quite reactive. It needs to be consistent, not conditional. And again, it comes to discussing, like disability. Mine, you can't tell what disability I have. And it's amazing that we have this panel and they can tell us what their actual needs are. But someone like me, it takes a lot of emphasis that this is my needs, and sometimes it's not believable.
Really articulate, thank you. Chris, I'm going to come to you and then we'll move on to sort of more procedural things as well.
Can I briefly speak to Mike Everett and ask him, because in his evidence, which I know is private and confidential, he doesn't refer to any solution to the issue of people suddenly encountering that the lift's out of order or the loo's not working, and the differential impact which that has upon people with disabilities. And does he think that this is because of a lack of receptiveness on the part of the house authorities? Does he think there's the standards of maintenance are not sufficient? Does he think that the repairs are not being carried out quickly enough? What does he think that can be done to change this? And just as a topical example today, I came in from the House of Commons car park, and instead of the two doors that used to be there are two much heavier, thicker doors, which say fire doors. But these are not doors that are easily openable, although they're not security doors, but they've just been put there, and they're making it much more difficult for people who are carrying luggage or whatever, who've got disabilities, to get through. So does he think that there's any understanding on the part of the House authorities of the extent of the impact of all this upon people such as himself? And just to also emphasise that the lift or the escalator from the car park is invariably out of order. Recently, when I was chairing a committee, I had to more or less threaten to suspend the proceedings until some of the lights above the Hansard reporters had fresh bulbs put in. It just seems these are the nitty-gritty things which, in this Palace of Westminster, should be taken for granted, but we can't take them.
Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the House authorities take these issues very seriously. I mean, my own personal experience of discussing it with colleagues and raising it with colleagues has been that it's been taken seriously, and that people do act on it. I think a lot of these issues they are difficult. They are difficult to resolve at times. I think probably what I would say is I think collectively we should probably try and create a more of a kind of culture of accessibility in the House of Commons and across Parliament. And I think by that I mean I think people should be more aware of the impact that actions have on people with disabilities. So a lot of the problems I run into are people just not thinking about kind of how their actions impact on people with disabilities. So it's kind of people blocking disabled entrances, locking disabled entrances, using accessible toilets when they don't need to, using accessible lifts for reasons they don't need to, and then breaking it in the process. No one's doing that maliciously. They're just not thinking how their actions, do impact on other people. So I think we probably could create more of a culture of accessibility across the House of Commons, and that's got to come, I think, from the top down, but also, across Parliament. Line managers need to talk about it more with colleagues, and I think we need to encourage people to see accessibility as more of a personal responsibility that everyone has, in the same way that we do encourage staff and members and visitors on the estate to see security as being a kind of personal responsibility. I think if we're able to create more of that environment, I do think it would probably address a lot of the issues that you're talking about.
If I could just come in on the point about maintenance, I know it's very emphatically not in the remit of this committee, but there is a wider issue here about the maintenance of Parliament and the way this issue has been fudged for many, many, many years. And even the fact that it is not part of this committee's remit, I think, reinforces the message that we are just prepared to kind of make do amends for many, many years. And that is also what people are doing on a smaller scale when it comes to adjustments within the palace. So that's my hobby horse out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Right, I'm just conscious of time because do you mind, Harry? We've only got about 15 minutes left, and I did want to get on to some of the procedures and information and that kind of thing as well. So Paulette, you were going to open that.
Right, I'm Paulette Hamilton, and I'm the member for Birmingham Erdington. Now, my question is around language and the documentation and how difficult it is at times to read it, especially if English is not your first language, or you've got a sight issue, or even neurodivergence, which people don't always mention. The paperwork is cumbersome. Sometimes it can be well over 200 pages long, and sometimes you have to read it a few times to absorb and to translate what it all means. What are your views on this aspect of Parliament? And if I start with Sunara, and perhaps Esther, you'd like to answer that one also?
This has been quite an emotional one, actually. Language it's been quite a tricky area. As I said in the beginning, asperges is the commonly used term. So as soon as you'd use the word asperges, it was automatically perceived that this person is disabled, can't do their job, and they just any request they make is a troublesome person, but that's not the case. And sadly, I've encountered that quite a lot, and it contributed to other health issues as a result of the languages used. We need to move away from dismissive remarks, and someone recently said to me, everyone has a bit of Asperger's in them. No, not everyone has a bit of Asperger's. You either are a neurodivergent or you're not. Language is very, very important. And for me, it is very important. Whenever someone says everyone has a bit of Asperger's in them, you're downplaying my needs. And it's really hard for me to actually express exactly how I feel, but it makes me close up and I don't want to talk about it anymore. And so I go back into my little shell.
You've been very, very articulate today, can I just say, so I'm very proud of that.
Esther, do you have any views?
Yes, I think particularly as a journalist covering this place, a lot of your job is trying to explain the procedure and what's actually going on to people, and that's a consistent battle. One of the big innovations since I've been covering Parliament, I think, has been a really simple thing, which has been explanatory notes on amendments. Because in the old days before that, you used to have to go line by line, look at which bit of the law, which bit of the bill this was referring to, then sort of reverse engineer from there what the meaning of Amendment 5B was. Now, just having that simple, the effect of this amendment would be X, is so much more accessible. And I wonder whether there are other aspects of procedure and parliamentary language where just a footnote or the availability of some kind of annotation would really help things, because it should be part of my job. I'm not complaining about that, but also people need to interact with Parliament independently, and there is definitely more work that can be done around the transparency of the technical language used here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll hand back to the chair unless anybody else wants to kick in.
I mean, Alex, you had a sort of follow-up kind of question.
I did, thank you, Chair. I mean, some of the evidence we've heard back talks about jargon busters. You've used an example, Esther, about a practical example. So just from your respective experiences, have you found that House of Commons staff have engaged, whether with yourselves or with others that you know of, in a way that in order to analyse what is kind of the most effective form of communication in order to try and demystify or sort of explain, this place and the work we do here? Or do you find that isn't the case or hasn't been the case?
I think staff in the House of Commons do put a lot of effort into trying explaining parliamentary procedure to non-specialists. We produced an MP's Guide to Procedure a few years ago, which was an attempt to sort of explain procedure in a more accessible, plain English way. That was aimed at members, but maybe could think about doing something like that for the general public. I do think a lot of the language that we use in Parliament is quite inaccessible for non-specialists. And can be quite off-putting for people with disabilities or other groups that don't traditionally engage with the work of Parliament. Select committees talk about witnesses, giving oral evidence, giving written evidence. It all sounds very formal and like a court, whereas actually, although this is a formal proceeding of the House, it's quite an informal discussion. But I think that the language you use around committees can probably be off-putting. And a lot of the procedures we use in the chamber and a lot of the language we use in the chamber is also sometimes doesn't have its logical everyday meaning. When the whip stands up and sort of names a day for consideration of business and says tomorrow, they don't mean tomorrow, they mean someday in the future, sort of thing. That's not and the use of things like forthwith in some of the standing orders, it's not clear what that means. We know that means without amendment, without debate, but general public and people with any sort of special needs or disabilities probably would have trouble, I think, understanding that and engaging with that. So I do think language is a problem, and I do think there's probably more that Parliament could do to try and address that, and we should be doing. But generally, my experience of working with colleagues has been that everyone is very committed and very keen to make parliamentary procedure as accessible and as clear to people as possible, to members, so that they understand the kind of the full use of the procedures we have to hold the government to account and to scrutinise legislation, but also to the general public, I think, to make it as accessible as possible.
Yeah.
I could just ask, and sort of relatedly, and it's really interesting, I think as well, if you just talk about, I'm reflecting on, if we try and explain to constituents, but just the wider public, and particularly for disabled people like Harry, like yourself, who you mentioned, who might be interested in working here. I was just looking at the Parliament website just to refresh my memory, and the Disability in Parliament page, and it talks about Parliament supports a range of internships. Here's some videos from people talking about their experiences and their experience of disability in Parliament, but it links to videos that are 12 years old. So it's not current, it's not a particularly kind of encouraging advertisement, I guess, then to the disabled members, those with kind of non-sensory, neurodivergent elements that then think, well, is this the Parliament that represents me and can represent me? I don't know if any of you have any views on that.
I'll just come in very quickly on that. I think one thing I would say is that a lot of people first come to Parliament as visitors, right? They're either with school trips or on a family day out, and I think that if you're watching it on TV or if you're visiting, it's kind of the same thing. You form an impression that might be an environment that you would suit or not suit, and I think for the vast majority of people, I'd be quite comfortable to say they would feel like it would initially suit them. And I think that's a massive part of it, because the perception, I think we need to talk about the difference between perception and reality here, because the perception of reality is, the perception of inaccessibility is as powerful as the reality. It might well be that actually we have great programmes in place for reasonable adjustments, we have great programmes in place to explain the accessibility of procedures, and we have great programmes in place to explain explanatory notes, etc., what's going on for people that are deep into the world. But we need to think about the people that are sat at home watching the news or visiting here on a school trip, and for whom that experience might be the difference between them thinking, yeah, I could be an MP in future, or, oh no, I didn't understand anything that went on there, it felt alien and I felt awkward the whole time, I'm not going to go near politics. this place has a very important individualised role in promoting the work of democracy in the UK. And I think how that comes across to both visitors and people that are watching on TV is really important.
That's a really good point. And I think obviously one of the other things we've talked about with language is words like bills, which for most of the time are not actual bills, they're just kind of essentially motions or whatever. But just can I just maybe just probe that point and the points Mike was making as well a little further, just on the procedure. So from a lot of members and former members, the interconnection between sort of procedure and some of the physical challenges they might bring were really drawn out in that session. So things like bobbing, the seating in the chamber, which you've mentioned, Mike, in the context of clerking, getting a seat in the first place, walking round to vote, and all of those kind of things. So there's a kind of way we work and the way we do things having a particular disadvantage for those with disabilities. Could, as staff, clerks or journalists or working for MPs, can you think of where the procedures are a real impediment potentially to you doing your job in that same way? That I mean, you mentioned one, Mike, in terms of not being able to really do your job as all the functions as a clerk. There's like, for example, has the move to digital, has that helped? Does physical paperwork, is that a particular challenge, do you think, or those kind of things?
I can't think of many procedures at the House that would prevent me doing my job. I mean, you've listed quite a few examples of difficulties in the chamber for members, and obviously that's for the House to sort of to think about itself. I think there's probably more things that select committees could think about in terms of making their work more accessible to people with disabilities, and making the information and outputs of committees more accessible to people with special needs and disabilities. I mean, most committee reports are written reports, which we don't routinely produce reports in kind of a variety of accessible formats. Mm-hmm. Some committees have produced reports that way, but usually it's quite bespoke because we think that a report or an inquiry might be of interest to particular groups. So perhaps that's something committees could think about doing more regularly. Obviously, it would have resource implications, but I don't think it necessarily has to be really costly. It could be something as kind of something as simple as like a chair posting a sort of YouTube video on the committee website talking about the report and the recommendations. And I think some of the procedures that enable the public to engage with Parliament, again, are also more difficult if you have disabilities or special requirements. I mean, select committees still carry out their inquiries the same way they've done for the last 200-300 years, by issuing a call for written evidence and taking oral evidence. And if you're not comfortable or not able to do either of those things, you're quite unlikely to engage with the work of committees. So maybe committees could start to think about taking evidence in different ways and more innovative ways. Some committees have done that, but it's often been quite bespoke. Perhaps we could, committees should think about doing that more regularly, and thinking about taking evidence in audio files or video formats, which would not just help people with different accessibility needs, but I think probably would also reach some of the other groups that don't usually engage with Parliament. But I don't know if anyone else has got any.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things you mentioned there in terms of bobbing and voting and so on, are obviously more of a direct concern for members. But it was really striking covering Parliament during the pandemic, just how quickly the system adapted to make it possible that some of those things did not need to be done in person. And obviously the House of Lords has retained some of those practices, but it remains pretty controversial, I think, within this place. And I guess the point I wanted to make there is I don't think it should be assumed that kind of disabled people as a monolith want everything to be done online. I don't think that's the case. But I think it's about having more options And that was what was really revealed by the pandemic experience, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Marie, you had a final question.
Yeah, I mean, it was really supposed to be about how the House of Commons could improve to make it easier to understand for staff and the public, but I think we've touched on that. But I think there's so much more that could come out, and I think we're obviously completely running out of time. So I just want to say, if anybody, yourselves or anybody watching this, has suggestions about how they think that it might be something really small, it might be something much bigger, then I'd really like to hear from them, because I think it's really important that we take on board lots of different views about how this place can change and how it can be improved. That issue about language that Mike in particular was talking about, I think is really really important, something I'm really keen on seeing us change as well, because I don't think we should be doing things that make it very difficult for the public to understand. We are here to represent the public, and if the public don't understand what we're doing here, how can they scrutinise us? So I'm really keen to understand more about that, but we don't have time to go any further, I don't think.
Is there anything that you feel you've not been able to impart or say? And obviously, as Marie says, if you've not got anything else you want to say now, please do write to us. We'll keep all that in confidence, or come back, follow what we're doing. We are hearing from many others, and we're hoping to come up with a series of sort of recommendations for different aspects of the house, probably early in the autumn is our aim, sort of doing some of that, pulling that together over the summer.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
Because I found myself I'd like to say this on the record, because I found myself getting very cross listening to some of the stuff that you've experienced and how things haven't changed quickly enough. So I just want to say, we need to change that, and that needs to happen very soon, and I'd really like to be part of that change, and thank you so much for telling us about it. I found myself getting very cross about it, but thank you for that.
Absolutely, and thank you all so much.
Can I just come in with one more? I think a good note to end it is, and I really want this to come out of this session, if there's anything, like, I've worked here for 4.5 years, so the reason why I'm still here, I'd have left after a year if it was awful. I really love the job that I do, and 90% of it doesn't pertain at all to my disability, right? But that's because I've had to work to put the adjustments in place, one. And that's also because, and I wish to really acknowledge that and end it on a positive point, there were so many good people here in the house staff, either at debate or dispatch box, that helped me get a cup of coffee, or that helped me get lunch when I need it. There were so many good people that really see it and they want it to work. I don't want to make this place seem like a villain. It's not. My critique is that actually, if I want lunch, I have to go down individually to debate and go, oh, hi, how are you? And I've formed those relationships. They see me coming, they know, and it's lovely. It's one of my favourite parts of the day, when I get to interact with a member of staff and they see me coming, they're like, how's your day? Can I help you get lunch? Fine, great. But I have had to have the confidence and the assertiveness to form that relationship and to make that happen. And there's nothing systemic about that, because nobody's come up to me and gone, how are you going to get lunch at lunchtime? Nobody's come up to me and gone, by the way, the House of Commons can help you with this. And so my experience of the House of Commons generally has been really positive, but I'm really wary that a lot of that has been very individual to me, and there's nothing systemic about how that would be replicated for someone like me who might not feel as confident to ask for what they need. And that shouldn't be on the person to do, to continually ask for what they need. It should be there and it should be offered, because we should be equal in the workplace.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great note to end it. And can I just thank you again? I think, the passion that all of you have shown for your jobs and the work that you do, and the enjoyment you have sort of working here, as well as, as we've heard, the challenges and those systemic issues, which is what really this committee is about, trying to help overcome, so that you can flourish and succeed and contribute in the brilliant way that you're all doing. So thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today. Thanks very much.